Hello and welcome to the book show on Diversity Television. I'm Ava Collopy, a writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. My work primarily focuses on social issues and how they play out in family dramas. We are in Ireland, the land of literature and academia. And my guest today is Jennifer Fulford, who has a number of books published. One is Love, Blood, and Steel, a Three Musketeers story, a continuation. Poems from Planet P, which she self-published through her own Black Bomb Books publishing house. Hello, Jennifer. How are you today?
Hello, Ava. I am in North Carolina in the United States on the East Coast. I'm actually in the mountains. I live in western North Carolina in the Smoky Mountains, and the closest town to me is Asheville, North Carolina, and it's a big artist community here. There are lots of people who do very creative things, and I happen to be one of them. Thank you for having me on the show. And the weather today, well, it's been pretty cold. It's just, it's winter is really hitting today, and the temperature has been around 20, and it's probably going to get way colder tonight. So not necessarily my favorite kind of weather, but I'll live with it because the mountains are beautiful.
I have 3 questions for you today. What is the hardest thing about being a writer? What is the most rewarding thing about being a writer? And what advice would you give someone who's thinking about becoming a writer, but they don't think they have quite enough talent? What would you tell them?
Those are some pretty tough questions. So let's start with the first one. What's the hardest thing about being a writer? And my answer is definitely not what every writer would say, but it's one that you might hear a lot, and that is writing is something that you do alone. And sometimes you're doing it in a vacuum, meaning that no one is there to tell you during your process if what you're doing is worth anything or is good or will speak to someone on a certain level and make them want to finish your story or will entertain them. So you often are having long stretches where you're writing something, in my case, a novel, and you have no idea if what you're writing has any meaning to the person who will read it. So that can be kind of tough because you're going to invest a lot of time and effort, not just in the writing part, but in the revising part, and you just won't know if it's any good. So that's probably the hardest thing about being a writer, knowing if what you're doing is worth it. Second question, what's the most rewarding part? So that relates to the first one in that after you put all that effort into your book, and it could take a while. My first book, Blood, Love, and Steel, took me 14 months to draft. I was not writing every day. I would write in spurts. On like every third day, I would write more than 1,000 words. And by 14 months in, I had a 65,000 word novel. And it was a draft. And it felt really great to get to the end of it, but that was really just the beginning because I'd never written a book of fiction before. So when I wrote the first draft, I was trying to learn how to make a book of fiction better while I was writing. And I did take some techniques that I was learning and use them in the book. But then I started to have editors and readers of fiction and readers of historical fiction take a look at my work and give me stronger feedback. And I did that for probably 4 years. And while I was doing that, I was also trying to figure out, well, how am I going to get this published? And that is a whole nother matter. And it involved a learning curve on a different sort of vein because I was trying to figure out not only how to write a good piece of fiction, but how to sell it. And I feel like I got lucky because my very first book of fiction eventually got picked up by a small publisher. So that was extremely rewarding to know that what I had written had struck a vein with a publisher enough that they offered to publish my work. So that was just incredible. And then once my work got out into the world, not just that book, then the other two books that followed it, I got a real kick out of hearing from readers about what they thought was the thing that stuck with them the most. And it wasn't necessarily the thing that I was thinking would stick with readers when I was writing the books, but it was something that was really personal to a reader. And that's really cool, because people are going to take things out of your work that you just have no idea will have meaning to them. And it will also take on a life of its own. The book will be out in the public. People will read it. You'll hear from them. And then other people will read it. And you'll get reviews online. And it's just really interesting what people say. So that is really rewarding, to get feedback on your work. When you finally have a finished product and you've worked really hard on it, you've had it vetted, you've had people read it, you've had editors comment on it, you've even had just ordinary people like your mom or a friend of a friend of a friend read your work and give you feedback. And you've taken all of that into account, kept some, left out other things, and then it's out in the public and everyone can read it, and anyone, strangers, and you start to hear back from people about what they thought about your work. And it often surprises me what people will say. They will take something out of something that I've written, and they'll really say that that was the thing that had the most meaning to them, when it might be something completely different that you had in mind when you wrote the piece. So that's always interesting to me, because what I think might be the theme or the lesson or the idea that you want to impart is not necessarily the one that gets the attention of the individual reader. So advice for writers who are new and are wondering whether they have what it takes. The best advice is keep writing. If you love it and you really think you have some great ideas and you just have that urge to write, then keep writing and keep learning about writing. So while you're writing, find out ways that you can learn techniques, skills, take classes, go to groups, talk to other writers, and also read a lot. And that's the hardest part for me, because I often don't have the time that I'd like to devote to reading. But if you read widely, meaning not just in your genre, which you should read in the genre that you're writing, but also lots of other writers, that will help your work too. It will show you things that you want to add to your work, and it will improve it and strengthen it. But the best thing you can do is write like a fool all the time.
Disinformation is spreading alongside the new coronavirus. To counter this, it is important to share information that comes from reliable sources, such as health authorities and the World Health Organization. During the COVID-19 outbreak, only trust official information sources and credible media outlets. Do not share unverified information. This is a message from UNESCO.
For more information about the book show and all of our other programs, please visit our website at diversitytvireland.com.